So this week we had Women's Equality Day. And in a way, 2024 is really the year of the woman. I mean, women are in positions that in greater numbers than they have been in years, both when it comes to representation in Congress, for example, and in major corporations. And there is a woman on the presidential ballot this year. But there is still a lot of work to be done. Women earn 84 cents to the dollar of men in America, and Black women, Latino women, Indigenous women make far, far less than that still. And we're in the middle of a political cycle where the discussions about a woman's role in society are revolving around whether or not she has or can give birth. That's where we are in the year of our Beyonce 2024. So, how do we fix this? I'm Kimberly Atkins Stohr, and this is Justice by Design, where we tackle the issues facing our society and talk to the people who have the ideas and who have done the work in solving them. Don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcasts so you don't miss an episode ever. And to talk about how we solve the issue of women's equality in America, I cannot think of a better guest to have than the incomparable Jill WineBanks, the woman who needs no introduction. Jill, thank you so much for joining me.
Thank you, sis, for having me on your show. It's a great show, and I'm very excited to join, especially on this topic about which you probably know I have some strong opinions and some real passion.
So you need no introduction. You are, among other things, my co-host on our other podcast, hashtag Sisters-in-Law. But as I always do, just briefly introduce yourself to any listener who has been living under a rock and doesn't know who you are.
Well, let me start with, you said women earn 84 cents on the dollar for a man. If you give me 1 minute, I'll go get my 59-cent pin.
Oh, wow.
Because when I first started working on the ERA, women earned 59 cents for every dollar that a man earned. That was in 1975. It was the first year that I was not subject to the Hatch Act, so that I could take on a political issue like that. I graduated college as a journalist, but girls, as we were then known, and that's why my book is called The Watergate Girl, because we were called girls in that era, we were offered jobs on the woman's page, and I wanted to do hard news. So I went to law school so that an editor would take me seriously. I somehow got sidetracked and decided that I would pay back my student loans by working as a lawyer. And so I went to the Department of Justice in the organized crime section, where I was, for the first time, the first woman. In law school, my class had a limit of 5% Black students, 5% women students. And
Wow.
only 4% of the legal profession was female at the time. 4%. Now, we've made huge strides in terms of law school classes and the legal profession, but not at the top of those places. So we still have a lot of work to do there. I then became a Watergate special prosecutor, trying the top people around Richard Nixon and trying to indict him. But President Ford, when Nixon resigned, President Ford pardoned him, and so we couldn't indict him, even though he richly deserved it. I then went into private practice, then went in the Carter administration, which was one of the first administrations to have a lot of women. Wow. And we formed what was called the Old Girls Network, because there was already an Old Boys Network. I was the first woman to be general counsel of the U.S. Army. Luckily, I was not the last, which means I didn't screw up too badly. They were willing to hire another woman. My direct successor was a woman, so I'm very, very proud of that. And I was able to take on a lot of women's issues in the Pentagon, including integrating women into the regular Army, into the military academies, and eliminating what was then called the WACs, the Women's Army Corps. And the reason I wanted, and Brisby agrees that it was the right thing to do.
Yes,
thank you, Brisby.
Very proud of you.
He's very into this. I wanted to eliminate it because there were only 2 female generals at the time, the head of the WACs, and the head of the nursing corps. And that meant that a woman could be a general, but she couldn't be the head of for example, the Judge Advocate General Corps, because that was assigned to the regular Army. And so I knew that promotions were being held back because there were only 2 spots for a woman to progress from a colonel to a general. And that just seemed wrong to me. So we were able to get legislation to abolish them. I then re-met my high school boyfriend and moved back to Chicago, where I joined a law firm, and then got recruited to be the first Solicitor General of the state of Illinois.
Wow.
And then became the first woman to be the Deputy Attorney General. And I'm proud to say we have had a woman Attorney General since then who was elected. And after that, I got recruited to be the head of the American Bar Association, the first woman. And again, for the second time this year, there is now a second woman head of the ABA. So that's good news. And to bring us forward, the ABA just passed Resolution 601 at its annual meeting in August this month, which supports the passage and publication of the Equal Rights Amendment.
Wow.
So I've been working on that since 1976, where I worked with Ann Richards about doing this. And that was quite an introduction to politics. I mean, I came out of the government totally hatch-acked. And so now I was really involved in politics. And at the 76 convention, spoke to many delegations trying to get states to pass and ratify the Equal Rights Amendment.
So
38. Go ahead.
ahead.
You asked your question. Sorry.
No, I want to focus on the ERA in this episode and not only talk to you about why you think it has not passed, it's not been enacted yet, and whether, importantly, it would lead to the solutions to some of the problems that I identified at the top. A lot of the areas in which women have been unable to reach equity with men despite passage of other laws that protect against gender inequality, but despite the fact that the Constitution is supposed to have an
Right.
equal protection clause that naturally guarantees equal rights between the genders. But I want to talk, given your history, right, of using the words of Kamala Harris, when there's a door, you kick the effing door down. You've kicked a lot of effing doors down, Jill, in your life. What is it about the ERA that will serve as a tool to kicking down these remaining doors that exist for equal pay? There are more women at top C-suite jobs, but certainly nowhere near enough, and definitely, particularly not women of color. We are still seeing Kamala Harris being treated in very weird ways, to say the least, as a nominee. What is it about the ERA that you think will help right the playing field here? And first of all, explain what the ERA would do.
Oh, okay. Let's start with that. And let me say, I think the ERA is a step.
Yeah.
It is not the final solution.
Yep.
It is in some ways symbolic and could help. You can pass all the laws you want. I'm old enough that there was no EEOC when I first started practicing law. There was no women's movement. There was no Ms. Magazine. Help wanted ads were in a newspaper listed as help wanted male, help wanted female. I was asked questions in interviews that were, what kind of birth control do you use? How many children do you plan to have? I mean, those were legal questions. And if you didn't answer them, you didn't get a job. Those were questions I was asked. So, we've advanced from that, but not nearly enough. We're still pretty backward. And I talked to a lot of law students and college students. I spoke at my college, the journalism school, for graduation, and there's still discrimination, there's still misogyny, and no law is going to get rid of that. But it will make it go quiet in a way that makes it harder to fight, because if you know that someone is saying to your face, how many children are you going to have, because I can't hire you if you're going to have too many, you can fight it. If you don't have the openness about it, it's harder to fight because you don't know it's happening. And I'm just saying to everyone listening, particularly those of you who are under the age of 30, it is still existent. And you must be aware and fight it. You must take your seat at the table after you kick down the door. Don't sit in the back row. Sit at the table. That's for sure. The Equal Rights Amendment is a very simple thing. It basically says that equal rights shall not be denied because of sex. And it's important because, the Constitution says all men are created equal. It doesn't say all people. It doesn't say all men and women. It says all men. And women did not have the right to vote until the 19th Amendment. So there were 18 before women got the right to vote. And that was a long, hard-fought suffragette battle. I could wear my pin for suffragettes. But I'm going to stick with ERA today. So that's all it says. It's like basically, I haven't counted the words, but it's like one sentence.
Yeah.
And then a second that allows Congress to implement laws. I believe.
Yeah, go ahead.
I want to answer your questions. I'm sorry.
Yes. No, you believe. What do you believe?
Okay.
Tell us.
Well, there's this issue about why isn't it the official part of the Constitution? And the reason is, going back to when I first started working on it, there was a woman named Phyllis Schlafly.
Yes.
Who was one of the most effective communicators based on totally false stuff. Her big arguments were women will be drafted, we'll have to share bathrooms. Those were two of her biggest arguments. In the meantime, women couldn't get a credit card without their husband. You could not go in. You could be working, didn't matter. You had to have a man sign for you. There were so many horrible restrictions. Women were considered chattel. You could not be raped by your husband because you were his property. And so too bad for you. He could do anything he wanted with you. To me, those were more important than if I had to share a bathroom. And nowadays we have unisex bathrooms and nothing terrible has happened. Women would have to be drafted. And I think they should have been a long time ago. When there was a draft, and there isn't now, and I can, my Pentagon experience, I can talk about an all-volunteer force and what that means and how it happened. But the opportunity to serve in the military or to serve in a civilian capacity is one that is so valuable to full citizenship. And I have seen so many people benefit from the training they get, the education benefits they get afterwards, but just the training they get in the military, both in terms of the job they are assigned and the training they get for that, but in leadership, in following the rules, people benefit enormously and grow enormously from the experience. And that's talking to women who volunteer as well as to men who have volunteered. The Equal Rights Amendment isn't going to solve everything.
Right.
But its lack of being there really holds back women. So it's more that not passing it. And the argument against it that she raised, obviously people aren't making those arguments still. But they're saying, well, yeah, 38 states ratified it. That's the legally required number under the Constitution. But some of them have tried to withdraw their ratification because what's happened in the country in terms of the divisions and silos that we have. Mm-hmm. But it's clear, if anything is clear, you cannot undo a ratification. Once you've ratified, that's it. You can't take it back. The other argument is that when the law was passed, that when Congress got it going to get to the states for ratification, it had a preamble that said it has to be passed within a certain amount of time. That time has been extended, but the extended time has passed. There have been attempts to extend the time. The problem is it wasn't part of what was sent to the states. The only thing that was sent to the states for ratification was the actual language of the Equal Rights Amendment, those few sentences, 2 sections.
So not the timeline.
So not the timeline.
So
I do not believe that the timeline has any legal impact and that all that has to be done as his final act as president, I think that President Biden could say to the archivist, who is the one who's responsible for publishing it, publish it it will be officially added to the Constitution.
All right. So I
If
want to
he
get
fails
back
to do
to,
that, President Harris can do it. We
right,
know that President Trump, should he be reelected, will not do it.
right.
But President Harris could and should and would.
And I know that you're saying this is just a piece. This is not a panacea for creating equal status for women in the United States. But I want to focus a little more. You talked about Phyllis Schlafly trying to create
Yes.
this idea that it would take something away from women. It
Right.
would make women no longer women in the way that we know them in our society. And that feels really similar, Jill, to the discourse that we are having right now with people like J.D. Vance, who are trying to center the value of a woman, not just in caregiving, not just in the supportive role that they have in family as well as doing other things, but really limiting it
Yes.
to reproduction, to have giving birth to somebody who can also give birth, and regardless of where you are, whether you're childbearing years or beyond, that is where your value is centered.
Right.
Which for someone like me, even though I'm an auntie, I've been an aunt since I was 18 months old. I am a stepmother. I have been I am a mentor. I have been an integral part in countless young people's lives. To me, under JD Vance's definition, I am worthless. I have no
Right.
I have no role in our society. And there's also this idea of women. You know, we see women sitting themselves in the kitchen because that's the most important place for them. Now, listen, I can cook. I love cooking, and I can cook really well. But I also have, 3 postgraduate degrees. I can do more things than that. So try to take Phyllis to JD and kind of tie what was happening then in the original fight for the ERA to what's happening right now, Joe.
Well, Phyllis Schlafly would have agreed with everything that J.D. Vance is saying. It's hard to believe that 60 years later, it's still being said aloud. It is appalling that, and he does not even recognize that the stepmother role is a value. You have to have given birth. He criticized the head of the teachers union, who is a stepmother,
Sure did.
saying, well, she doesn't care about children. She shouldn't be in charge.
Dedicated her whole life to the education.
Exactly.
Agree with her policies or not, she has dedicated her entire career to education, and he just negated that.
And I think mentoring, as you have mentioned, I have mentored so many wonderful people. You met one when we did the Sisters-in-Law show in Boston. I mean, she is a phenomenon. My goddaughter has a daughter that is just a gem, that I have a very active role. And even if I didn't, I was head of career and technical education for the Chicago Public Schools. I care about the education of children. And I get as many votes as anybody who has children. I am equal to any of them. And it is appalling that this is what we're talking about. The Equal Rights Amendment would stop some of that. I think the Equal Rights Amendment would give an additional grounds for saying that women have control over their reproductive choices, which would include not having children and having cats instead, and dogs. We both love our dogs.
Which is important because we have seen Clarence Thomas has signaled that he thinks the protections for contraceptions are on the table under the Supreme Court's jurisprudence. So saying the right to not have children is very much a part of all of this, right?
Exactly. And so those are reasons why the Equal Rights Amendment could, if passed, put a stop to all this nonsense and protect general rights of women. And we would never again face the prospect that someone could say to our face, well, we can't hire you because, everybody else is a man. We can't possibly let you travel with a man, and travel's required. I mean, all the things that still go on.
Yeah.
And it's not just here, it's worldwide. My grand goddaughter spent several months working in Israel on a kibbutz. And she was told she couldn't have the job she wanted in the garden because that was a man's job. She had to work in a factory doing repetitive plastic stuff. And I always thought that Israel was so far ahead in terms of gender equality. But I guess I was wrong. If they literally, she confronted them and they said, no, you can't have that. You have to have this
Wow.
factory job. So it is a worldwide problem, and we're way behind other countries. We're way behind in terms of our leadership. I mean, there are women presidents all around the world, and we've never had one. We have, Shirley Chisholm was the first to, I think, run. And
Hmm.
so she was both a woman and a person of color.
Yeah.
Hillary Clinton was on the ballot. Um, uh, Ferraro was a candidate for vice
Vice
president.
president. Yep.
And of course, Kamala, spelled Kamala, for anybody who although I expect no one who's listening doesn't know how to say her name.
Yeah.
Um, she was successful in her bid for being the vice president, and now is on the ballot for president. And
Yeah.
it's so exciting to see children. I loved her nieces at the convention telling us how to pronounce her name.
I
I
did
thought it
too.
was so cute.
It was very cute. So I want to get legally nerdy just for a minute,
Yes.
just so that our listeners understand why we need the ERA beyond, other laws that protect against gender discrimination. Because constitutionally, the standard by which something that is discriminatory against someone based on their race, for example, is different than the standard for something that is discriminatory based on gender. It's a less high standard for gender discrimination under the Constitution if something is challenged, something called
Yes.
intermediate scrutiny, as opposed to something like race or religion, religious affiliation. Those get strict scrutiny. So, talk about that difference and how the ERA would bring that up to that same level of scrutiny.
So it's not nerdy. That is an important point in terms of the results that we get. And it's come up this year in Supreme Court arguments, not for women particularly, but the difference in the standard as to what the outcome is. If you have strict scrutiny, it's a much higher standard. You can look at voting rights and other rights that have higher standards, and that makes a big difference. So this would impose a need to have a really hardcore, legitimate reason to restrict a right that you can't overcome by just saying, well, it would be nice and it's okay. It has to be something that there is no other alternative to serve the same end. And it gets that high standard. It's like the difference between a grand jury indicts on a level of evidence, but the jury has a higher standard of proof.
Right.
And the grand jury shouldn't indict unless they think that standard would be met at trial. But it is a different standard beyond a reasonable
Compelling
doubt.
government interest is what they call it.
Yes.
Compelling government
Yes.
interest.
Exactly.
And it has to be narrowly tailored. So you can't just do anything. You can't just throw spaghetti at the wall
Right.
and say that.
There has to be no alternative way to achieve it, and it has to be as narrow as it can be. You can't just, you have to look at, well, what else would be impacted by this? How would it apply elsewhere?
And is there any other way to do this without
Yes.
trampling on the rights of
Yes.
gender equality?
Yeah.
So, Jill, in the meantime, while we're pushing for our leaders to recognize that the ERA has been ratified and it's just a matter of crossing the T's and dotting the I's, what's the one thing that you think people can do to help push the fact that voters clearly, we've seen it since Dobbs, are aware about the gender inequality in our country and want to do something about it? What's the one thing they can do?
Boy, that is such a hard question. The one thing, I don't have an answer to that, Kim.
Yeah. I think voting is a good place to start.
Well,
I know people see
yeah,
that
that's
as
not going to fix it. That's not, I
as
mean,
an unsatisfactory answer, but you know what? You can't fix it without it.
well, we obviously need a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, and a Democratic White House. But I see the problem really as a deeper social problem that no law is going to change. And
Speak more about that.
well, I mean, this goes back to my time in the organized crime section. You have hardcore organized crime members, and you can pass all the laws you want. They're going to ignore them. They're going to keep on doing it. When the EEOC first came into existence, when we first started focusing on all these issues, men didn't get it, and they kept on doing the things that they did. We went through a period of male chauvinism where they wouldn't say things because they were being too polite, but they still felt it in their hearts. I think it's only by exposure, and this happened again when we eliminated and integrated West Point, for example. There was a test done where they would put some classes would have women and some wouldn't. And the theory was that the ones who had women would see that they were performing equally and doing just as well. And so they would accept the women better than the ones who didn't interact with the women. And it turned out that the pressure on those who had women to hate them from those who weren't with the women made them even worse opponents of women in the military. It has been overcome, obviously. That was in 1975, 76 that we were doing this, 76, 77. So it's really, I think exposure does eventually help. When you see women performing, when you see that they're doing the same job. When I got out of law school, I was at the time married to a lawyer. Bad move, but he would get mail from Columbia saying his name, comma, Esquire. I would get it as Mrs. his name.
Yeah.
And I said, if you ever expect a penny from me, I earned the same degree. And so it is sometimes you have to confront the problem. Sometimes you have to laugh about it. You can't make a federal case out of everything, but we can't ignore what's happening. We do have to confront it. And voting for the right people certainly is a good start. Passing the ERA, or not passing it, is passed in my view, but getting it to be part of the Constitution. Oh, Brisby's here kissing me. So he clearly agrees. I think, those are the first two things I would do, is to make sure that we start thinking about this and dealing with it. Women have to confront the problems they're faced with and deal with it in the appropriate way, but they need legal support for it. And I think that as more and more men have children, girls, little girls, who grow up to be lawyers, doctors, veterinarians, whatever they want to be, including homemakers. There's nothing wrong with wanting to grow up to be a premenopausal woman who's bearing children.
Yes.
I seriously mean that. That is a valid choice. It's
Absolutely.
not going to be barred by the Equal Rights Amendment. It will give the rights to everybody to do what they want to do. Right. I was raised to believe I could be anything I wanted to be, and that's what I want for everybody else.
Well, trailblazer, my fellow sister-in-law, the Watergate girl, and also my fellow childless dog lady, Jill WineBanks. Thank you so much for joining me for this very, very important conversation.
Thank you for doing this conversation and this whole podcast so that we can all learn to find the solutions. And I'm going to think more about your last question and give you some more answers once I think about it.
Oh, I love that. You can come back anytime. What can I say? Jill WineBanks is a national treasure. And I really appreciated what she said, particularly at the end, that this isn't just a legal issue, ensuring equal rights for women. It's also a societal one, and we all have a role to play. Well, that's it for this week's Justice by Design, where we find solutions to the problems that our society is facing. Don't forget to follow us wherever you get your podcast, because we will be here every week. And I will see you next week for a new episode. Take care.